Congresswoman Barbara Lee of California, co-chair of the House Democrat Steering and Policy Committee. Congresswoman, I will begin with you. What's at stake here? Like take us to the state-by-state story. What happens if the Supreme Court ends Roe versus Wade as we know it? How does that impact different kinds of states, and what would Congress be able to do, if anything, about it?
Thanks a million, Jason, for having us this evening. First, it will really deny people's right to access an abortion, and it begins to actually erode and really take away and end Roe versus Wade. People have a right to make their own healthcare decisions. People have a right to make their decisions as it relates to having an abortion or not. And so what we're trying to do in Congress, and we passed in the House the Women's Health Protection Act, which would put into law, finally, abortion access and also the right to a safe and legal abortion. You know, this is an issue also about equity and barriers. Low-income women, primarily women of color, people of color, are denied access to the full range of reproductive health care, including abortions. And so what we're seeing now is in states where people can't afford to exercise their constitutional right, we see them not being able to travel because they don't have the money, or for whatever reason. This is an issue around racism. It's an issue of equity, and we have to fight to make sure that we pass the Women's Health Protection Act. It's in the Senate now, and so I hope everyone will call their senators to make sure that they move forward and pass this bill, because this is a matter of life and death for so many people.
Cecile, I want to play you some sound from a virtual event in Congress yesterday where they were talking about what the potential impact of this new Supreme Court hearing and potential ruling could be. And I want to get your thoughts on the other side.
This infringement on women's rights, on our privacy, on the attempt to have state control of our personal health, really is what we would see in an authoritarian state. It's not what we would expect in New Hampshire. I think if you want to see a revolution, go ahead, outlaw Roe v. Wade, and see what the response is of the public, particularly young people.
Cecile, what are your thoughts about that? Do you think this revolution is possible, and how serious is this?
Well, I couldn't agree with Senator Shaheen more. This is anti-democratic. It's anti-American. And as Congresswoman Lee said, there is a way to address this, and that is through federal legislation. I would note that when this was passed in the House of Representatives, and I really thank her for her leadership, not a single Republican member of Congress voted to protect and support abortion access. And that's really what we're looking at here. Is the Republican Party has been on an effort for the last several years to outlaw abortion. And what's happened now, after they put 3 members onto the Supreme Court in a highly partisan way under Donald Trump, we now have a Supreme Court that has refused to act on a Texas abortion ban that has now been in effect for nearly 3 months. And literally, this court has done nothing. The concern about this is widespread. It's far beyond Mississippi. It's far beyond Texas, because people around the country are realizing this could happen anywhere and it could happen everywhere. But make no mistake about it, this is a right that people everywhere have, regardless of political party. What I don't think the Republican Party understands is that more than 80% of Americans believe that the people who should make decisions about pregnancy are people who are pregnant, not the federal government, not politicians. And so the opportunity, in the voting booth and in the midterm elections to right these wrongs is going to be incredibly important. I'm so glad that this story is being covered, because literally the rights that we have had in this country for nearly 50 years are at stake before the Supreme Court.
Donna, now I have to be my usual somewhat cynical self. I hear that if the Supreme Court outlaws Roe versus Wade, or it makes it essentially ineffective as law, that there will be a revolution at the polling place, that this will galvanize men and women, especially white women, to vote against the Republican Party. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. The Republicans have been singing this same song for in a very serious way, certainly in the last 4 years, but the last 20, it doesn't seem to have had that much of an impact on voting. looking at what this case could do you believe that if the Supreme Court ends Roe versus Wade, that we'll actually see an impact on that in a negative way for conservatives in the ballot box next year?
Well, Jason, here's what we do know is that an overwhelming majority of the American people believe that women should have a right to make a decision about an abortion because it's their body and their right. And we know that is true across demographic groups. We know that it is true no matter the age and income levels. And so I do think that over generations, there has never been a greater threat to abortion rights and access to abortion than there is right now. So does it have the potential to galvanize generations, legions of younger people for whom abortion rights and the access to abortion has been part of their lives for their entire reproductive lives? And so I think that there's a potential, but I think it requires leadership, and it requires us to galvanize the American public and make sure that they understand what's been placed at stake. And I thank the leadership of Congresswoman Lee and Democrats in the House for standing up for women's access to abortion. And the Senate needs to act as well. I think that we are at a stage right now where there is such a threat to democratic governance, and that includes the constitutionally protected right to make decisions about whether or not to have an abortion, and that is under threat, and laws across the country in states will fall as a result of overturning Roe versus Wade.
Congresswoman Lee, I want to play some audio from you talking about the importance and significance of being able to get access to free and affordable abortions, and get your thoughts on the other side.
I was one of the lucky ones, Madam Chair. A lot of girls and women in my generation didn't make it. They died from unsafe abortions. In the 1960s, unsafe septic abortions were the primary killer of African American women.
Congresswoman, you had to leave the country to get an abortion. So you have lived what it was like in this country when abortion it was not a part of women's health care they could get access to. Do you think things could get that dire that quickly in this country again if the Supreme Court does what we all expect them to try to do with the current 6-3 rulings in favor of conservatives?
Jason, people make these grueling decisions. This was a terrible, heart-wrenching decision that I had to make at age 16. And let me tell you, this was way before Roe versus Wade. And what I worry about, and what I think everyone is concerned about, is a return to unsafe abortions. And so what we're fighting for is to make abortions safe, to make them legal, to make them accessible, and to make sure that everyone, regardless of their income, regardless of their background, have access to safe and legal abortions. And that's why we're working, and I'm really proud to say that we have the most pro-choice caucus, Democratic caucus ever. I co-chair the pro-choice caucus. Congresswoman Judy Chu led with her bill, the Women's Health Protection Act. And so we are clear that, and what Donna said about young people, I think we're going to see a turnout at the polls, because young people, this is all young people know. They don't know what it was like when I was growing up and before Roe versus Wade, and people were dying, women were dying behind unsafe abortions, and we can't go back there because, as I said earlier, this is a matter of life and death, and this is a personal decision. It's a decision that whether you agree or disagree with abortions, this is a person's right to make their own decisions about their own health care and their own lives.